You should have them, I do.
No, Alan G.
Alan G, not allergy. Huh?
Algae.
Here. Oh, Pat Parker's here. Hi, Pat Parker.
We're trying it. Linda's here as a backup in case.
Yeah, you're actually here in the training. That's great. How cool.
Jenny, I met, and
Carrie.
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 How could you say that?
I met, we did.
Carrie Berry.
Carrie.
New people.
What's your name?
Barry?
Barry. Okay, we have Perry and Barry.
Jane.
Jane.
And me.
That one's,
Trying to
that
get.
one's yes, this morning I greeted you.
Some of the things you're going to hang out here long enough.
You're a little out of view.
What?
The camera needs to turn a little bit to your ward.
Alan, can you do?
I don't have a way.
You're off
That's
camera.
right. No,
What's wrong with that?
More
What's that?
towards
Towards you.
Michael.
Too much. Good.
Too much again?
That's
Too
perfect.
much.
Okay. Too much of a good thing.
Just try. What's wrong with
Thank you.
Battery.
Oh, quick.
So this time is set aside to just have an open discussion.
I can't hear. We can't hear.
How's that?
That's better because of these machines.
Oh, that's
Oh,
right,
that's
the
right.
machine. Oh, yeah. So this time is set aside to discuss, have a conversation about, primarily it's meant for the practice of Chenrezig, or whatever we're doing on that particular day. So Chenrezig today, but it's never limited to that. So any questions or comments or experiences you would like to raise, you're welcome to do that. What does that mean?
Still can't hear you.
You still can't hear. There's no way to turn this up? It's pretty close.
Well,
Do I have to get like that?
Yeah. Put it
Not
closer
quite.
to you,
Not
like
quite.
a rock star.
Turn the fan down.
He pulls it in and then he starts.
Yeah, he brought it in.
All right.
You'd have to talk more.
Is this loud enough?
If we go like that, that will mean we can't hear you,
Oh,
okay?
okay.
and if he goes like this, it means what fun.
That's the point.
I might say that's a good thing.
No.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Could you discuss the pros and cons of doing this meditation in English versus
Oh,
Tibetan?
You might repeat the question for those who in the back who can't hear.
The question is about the pros and cons of doing the practice of Chenrezig in English and or Tibetan, right?
Correct.
Why do you ask that? I mean, have you done the practice before?
I've done it twice. I'm a beginner, and I've done it twice in Corvallis, and it was done in Tibetan.
Yeah.
And so I was pretty lost, and I was switching back and forth between the English
Yeah.
text and trying to enunciate the Tibetan words. So it was pretty distracting.
Yep. I think you've eloquently stated the con. The downside of it. The downside of it is with very little experience with the practice, not having it in a language that you can read and understand while you're reading it is definitely a handicap. And some people feel like the practices must be stated in Tibetan or they're not authentic. So I don't think that's true at all. Most people, I think, have a hard time with Tibetan. It takes a lot to get good at Tibetan. And so I think that it's important to adjust what you do according to what it is that you need, especially in the beginning. So my recommendation is read it in English and learn to do the practice in English. So what is commonly taught around this, and the Tibetans are especially fond of this because they have a certain relationship with the material that most of us do not yet have. Especially if you've only done the practice a couple of times, you probably don't have this relationship, which is that these words were spoken, this practice was done by individuals who were renowned for accomplishing the practice. And so they became famous gurus in the history of Tibetan Buddhism. And so the Tibetans have a very strong relationship with that, like there's a blessing to be gained by just reciting the same text. Easy to relate to that, but if you don't yet have the backdrop to it, then it may not be that helpful. In fact, it may be so unhelpful that you give up the practice. And in the worst case, you give up your entire Dharma practice. Just because you can't get a foothold, you can't get into it somehow. So I think it's important. It's important to raise what you've raised. It's also important to have some understanding of the other side. That the language itself is, it's taught, is imbued with the blessings of those who accomplish the practice. And if you know some great teachers who accomplished the practice that you're learning, then you have a different relationship in that right away with it. Well, I'm connected with this person, the teachings I'm getting are very precious, I'm very moved by all of this, and now I'm doing the practice that this person did to accomplish that. We feel a big connection from that. And then it goes across the boundary, so then other practices we start to feel that way too. It never substitutes for an understanding. You really do need to have the understanding that you can get from reading and studying and looking at the text. Though today I said, don't worry about that. But it's because you also need to not go too far with that. You get enough understanding to do the practice and relate to it and begin to understand how it connects with other teachings. Then you also need to do the practice from the non-conceptual place. Just do the meditation as it's laid out and see what happens. Some people take a long time to get to that place, and they miss a lot by virtue of not getting the experiences that are kind of built into the formula, you might say. So some balance there is required. And I didn't intentionally state what exactly that balance is, so I figure you'll figure that out.
Maybe it's obvious, but they're just sort of a practical point is that when we do it in Tibetan, there's only one version. Like,
That's right.
When their translations are kind of in flux, there's different ones, and so which in some ways that's very helpful too, because if you read different translations, you might learn something more and get more something that is helpful. On the other hand, being able to do it in Tibetan, the Tibetan is set so that it has a certain number of syllables, can be recited with the tune and the chant, and so you can chant together. You can go to France to one of Coleridge's Dharma centers in France today and sit with them and do the same one, or you can go to a monastery in India and sit there and chant with them, except they'll go too fast. But, you know, that's a wonderful thing. And so that's one reason, you know, it could look like we're sort of clinging to this old thing, but that is a nice thing that is enjoyable to and fruitful to experience in a group. But I really do find at least in my own, even having been exposed for so many years, I've actually gone more towards doing my own personal practice in English. But, you know, some people love to do the Tibetan once they've really learned the meaning. But I think it's right that meaning first, but there is the point of being able to chant it.
KCC also sells a CD of a recording of the practice in Tibetan too, if that's useful to you to learn the practice.
You learn the proper pronunciation, learn the proper
Yeah,
pronunciation.
sometimes just to be able to play it over and over, you can learn it a little easier.
Is that the one you and Bill did?
Yes.
So I spent a long time in the morning with Bill and Dora doing Nundro in my little meditation area. It was very sweet.
Okay.
So it's very sweet.
Fame in small circles. Information.
I've gone through long swings back and forth between doing practices mainly in Tibetan and mainly in English for years. It's like, oh, now I'm doing it this way. And something back and forth.
Right now, Lama Eric has been sending us something where he and another translator are working on, it's a different practice, but they're working on trying to put it to verse in English. And so it says two things. One is that the translators themselves see the value, even though for them it's easy, but they see the value of having it in our own languages and feel that's very important. But secondly, it's very challenging to put the English into verse and not lose the meaning and have it said in a way that turns out to be pleasing to most people, or it's quite a challenge. But you know, so we really are in a period of, you know, where there's evolution going on with the way that we chant these practices. It's in flux.
John,
Yeah, I have a question about I have two questions. One of the reasons I didn't come this morning is because I just haven't made a connection yet with Chenrezig. And I've been here on multiple Sundays and do the recitations and all that, and leave, and I really don't. There hasn't been a connection yet. So I would ask, one, is there a particular simple book I could maybe understand more? You know, you say it's God of Compassion, but okay, well that's good. You know, well, Tara, and you know, why aren't I not doing a Tara practice? So, and the second part of the question is, what is it to practice?
What is what?
What is the practice? When you say, I practice this, well, what do you do? I don't know what that is.
Yeah. I have that too.
Hmm?
I have that too.
You have
that
yeah.
question. What is it? Yeah. Do you have that only about Vajrayana practices?
Well, I've been given, you know, different practices through my lifetime. You know, a mantra practice, it's, you know, easy to remember, you know. But I don't really know, I've not been given any practice in this.
So when you use that word, what do you mean?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking. You mean the word practice?
Yeah.
Well, when you sit and practice, what do? Do study and.
But you're using that word, so I'm just wondering what you mean by it.
Well, I mean, do you read, contemplate, and meditate?
Are you asking what I do? What are you?
Or does everybody do it individually different? I don't know. I don't know really where to begin.
Well, I think you're just referencing the steps of the liturgy and the visualizations and all. If you're talking about Chenrezig, it looks one way. If you're talking about shamatha, then maybe it looks a little different. It depends on what the meditation is that you're doing. So you could say, I mean, we call it practice because that's what we've been calling it and hearing it called for decades. And it's like so many other kind of naturally evolving terms, and the language evolves like that.
Yeah.
When I first heard it, it just seemed to me like, well, you're just doing something over and over. We call that practice. But somebody once, I remember a very long time ago, when I'd only been practicing for maybe 3 or 4 years, I remember thinking like, what actually is this? What am I actually? So when I think practice, I think I'm going to get good at something. I'm going to do something, I'm going to get better at it. Like, isn't that what it means? I'm roller skating, I'm riding a bicycle, I'm going fishing, whatever it is. It's like you're doing something and you're hoping that you're going to improve something, your skill or your happiness or whatever it is. But I think in this case we're talking about the repetition of, and I'm going to use this form because I actually feel derogatory about it, the formula. The formula. You just keep repeating the formula. In other words, you do more or less the same thing every time you sit down.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have this sense of satisfaction, like I'm getting better at it. Now I've got it mostly memorized. Now I can remember this part. I can visualize this and that. And within the context of those descriptions and your effort, which we'll call practice, then things happen. Like, for example, maybe along the way you hear a teaching that you heard a long time ago, and now suddenly it makes sense because you've been engaging in this practice or this meditation of Chenrezig. I would say those two are synonymous. The meditation of Chenrezig and the practice of Chenrezig. I wouldn't know what the difference is. You could make a difference, but I have never thought that there was a difference. The bigger question in my mind is, why are you doing it at all?
Why am I doing it?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually, that's a
Deepening myself.
reflexive question, is the
Yeah.
truth. That's why why
It's
am I doing it at all?
Yeah, well, any meditation practice I've done has been to deepen myself and quiet myself, or just more deepen myself. And so that the practice, so that the lineage, whichever one I'm working with, is staying with me longer. You know, whether it was, I used to do a lot of Hindu practices with, you know, so I mean, it just stays with me longer. And should I take a section of the book, and I mean, it seems to be broken into sections,
Yes.
and stay with one of those sections, because I can't sit down and read those 80 pages. You know, it'll just get lost somewhere. But if I had 4 or 5 pages and did those over and over again, that could work for me. Is
that legitimate?
Yes. To start with?
You could take Bill's doing a retreat, I understand, that has
Yeah,
the topic of Chenrezig.
yeah, because he's going to use all 80 pages.
No, actually, the problem won't. Even spending a week on the Chenrezig practice, there's enough in here that they're part. When we did it before, we didn't go into all the detail that's in parts of it. The actual core practice is very small. It's very short, and it's actually important to know what the root practice is.
Well, which part is it?
Okay.
Chapter?
You come to the retreat to find out.
I know.
This is the marketing department over there.
I'll be in Denver seeing my new grandson.
No, but there's a piece, just basically the refuge, there are a couple of pieces of refuge in bodhicitta that are not actually part of the core practice, but they're assumed any practice will have refuge in bodhicitta as the beginning part.
Right.
Then there's a brief visualization,
Uh-huh.
and then the praises.
So there's a
Very
structure,
short.
there's a reason.
And then there's basically a page before and after the mantra. That's the root text. That's what Tongtong Gyalpo wrote. The other things are in there to take something that is such a terse outline that you need kind of, how do I get some traction with this? So instead of just saying, by praying one pointedly in this manner, then you have the sixth realm prayer. By cultivating compassion related to the experiences of beings in this range of suffering. So it sort of expands it in order to get a little bit more detail. But it's important to actually, if you learn it, this is one thing I was reflecting this morning. On our Sundays, first Sundays, we have like not quite enough time to do something that really you can just take it and go with it. It's too short to really give enough detail. So, and we can't really give enough background. So it's possible to give a little flavor. You can kind of get a little flavor of it. But in terms of getting kind of an organized way, how would I approach actually learning this practice? We don't have enough time to do that and also provide a little flavor of the practice, which is actually the more important thing. Why would I bother trying to figure out how to do it unless I had a little sense of it, some sense of the flavor of it?
Yeah.
But these practices do require going through it and learning what is this section, what's going on here, what do I do here, what do I do here, and you know, your first step, you've actually done the first step, which is noticing that there are sections, as opposed to 80 pages of, you know, just kind of continuous prose with no commas or periods.
Yeah.
So there are sections, and learning those things, and so that's some of the material that.
Which section is the core practice?
So that's what I was saying.
Starts page 11.
Yeah, it's page 11.
Page 11, okay.
Yeah, it's page 11 through.
But then you skip
Yeah.
7.
It's page 11 through 15, and then 31, 32, 33.
There is a short book too. What's the title by the Herman Fisher?
Shinra Zig's Lord of Love?
Yeah.
Oh, well, wait, what's the name of
Isn't
the
it-
Eric's?
It's the little red one in
Yeah.
there.
These things
Yeah.
smell like rain. Is that the one?
No, that's a different
The one that, is it still Shinra Zig's Lord of Love?
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
The yellow, is
But
it
do
not
we
yellow?
have?
No, it's red.
The new one.
The new one's
Eric.
red.
Oh, it's red, okay.
She says we have it at home.
Oh.
One of the ones on our bookshelf.
John,
Yes?
there's only 66 pages.
Only
Does that make
66
it matter?
And
It got
half of it's in
20%
the foreign
better
language.
I didn't want to challenge the 80 because I figured, you know, it probably feels good to have it really big.
It was just a guess.
It was a guess. But there's the short book.
Okay, Shinra Zig Meditation and Introduction, which is based on
Was it my bookstore?
Booker, yes. Yeah, John.
Yeah, John, you're in your bookstore. In your bookstore.
John,
Hoodoo.
you're not getting off easy around here.
Translated by our Lama Eric, our half ours.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
That's a good, thank you.
And it
I'll come
requires,
back with other questions later after.
Just as a
Practice.
general principle in learning any Vajrayana practice is that it takes an investment of time to understand the structure of the practice, to learn what the visualizations are, and to do it enough that it starts to feel like it has some flow. And to do that, it's actually much better to do it on a retreat.
Yeah, well, it's much
Okay,
better
have
coming
some-
here on Sundays and having somebody interpret
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
give, and really verbally give a description of the visualization. So,
Will you be videotaping your retreat?
It'll be recorded one way or another.
We would be there, we'll be out of town. Visiting John's grandson.
I guess I'd like to add something to that from my own experience. That with any deity practice, which Chenrezig is a deity practice, it's like there's kind of a nice getting to know each other. And it changes throughout the time of you doing it, you know, just like your relationship to Salidra has changed from the first time you met. You know a lot more about each other, you go through ups and downs, but you deepen the connection. And that to me is a big part of the practice to me, is this deeper and deeper connection, so that it's sort of like, this may sound a little trite, but it actually works for me. Kind of like a friend you can call on very quickly, like 911. You know?
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, like you're falling into a lot of
Yeah, sure.
anger, or a lot of depression, whatever.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of like call up your friend Chenrezig, even for a nanosecond, even for a moment, or a whole
Yeah.
sit down, you know, a
Yeah.
whole, like, I'm going to do the 67 pages. Yeah, it starts getting like that. So in that way, it completely supports your path, the path to full awakening. You make this connection with someone who is the path, and then, yeah, all the pieces of the path, wisdom, compassion, start, you're soaking in it by being with that person. Whoever we're with, then we start being like them. That, I don't know, for me, that's a bit of the heart of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's within us already.
What's that?
It's within us with the heart. It's
I'm sorry?
within us- It's within us already, right?
Yeah, yeah. What's within us comes forth. Yeah. Like when you're with a really good friend and they kind of call forth your best qualities. You know, they'll say to you, ah, come on, you're better than that. You know, like that. So,
Alan, yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the English versus Tibetan and the movement of these practices from Tibet into the West, and kind of raised the point of people kind of struggling with getting acquainted with the practice. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of empowerments in practicing Vajrayana?
There's some specific you're looking for, or just generally?
Just generally.
It's a really big subject, but let's condense it a little bit for starters. One of the characteristics of the Tibetans in relationship to their spiritual tradition is that they have over many centuries developed a very strong sense of admiration, devotion, respect for especially for the renowned teachers. And so just in ordinary terms, if you knew somebody who had attained a significant degree of realization and was recognized, and you knew about that, and you had an opportunity to take teachings from, let's put the empowerment thing aside for a moment and just take teachings from that person, you might make a big effort to go to those teachings just because of even what you just heard. And you might pay special attention, especially if the person was very old and maybe they might not live too much longer, or it was one of those things where it took 10 years in order to get one meeting with that person in a group, so probably it was going to be a long time before it could happen again. The preciousness of it then weighs on us in a different way, and so we listen in a different way, and we engage in the learning process in a different way, because we're clear that this may be a one-off, and so I need to do something special. So that kind of attitude, then, if you think about it in another way, you could think about it like this. Each of these sadhanas, these practice texts, each of the meditation on a deity is like a dramatic play. It's actually like a drama in a certain way. And like our lives are, when we get up in the morning, every day we have a dramatic play. And it's just not scripted. But when we look back on it, we can say, well, it was filled with emotion and passion and boredom or something. And in this case, then, it's clear that what the play is about is coming to recognize the nature of mind. So through this enactment, we go through this enactment, which is about recognizing the nature.
They can't hear you.
Oh, I thought you were over there. That's why I was talking.
Push it
Maybe
even
it was just-
closer. Push it closer.
I don't know why it's so quiet. It's never been.
It's the
Yeah.
air
Oh,
conditioner.
yeah, I keep
Yeah,
forgetting
it's
that.
the air conditioner.
So I can turn my hearing aid down. I don't hear the air conditioner. I'm wondering why you're not doing that.
Now we can hear you. Okay.
So
Sure, upon
the dramatic play, then, I'll say from my own side, I found in the beginning to be totally boring. Totally boring and very difficult to relate to. I would far rather go to a coffee house and have coffee and tea with friends. It's like very difficult personally to penetrate it. But once it became like clear how certain pieces fit together, then I really wanted to do that, and it became important to do it. And doing long retreat made sense in a way that it hadn't before. So if we take that much of it, and we look and we see the relationship with the teacher in this case and the practice is such that things happen when that relationship is intense, when it shares certain characteristics like respect and intrigue, like it's interesting to get a new practice and so on, then if we engage in that practice and we get some benefit from it, let's say we get a lot of benefit from it, then we have a vested interest on behalf of others to protect that practice in any way that we can. So then we get into this thing of, well, it's pretty hard actually to make that entrance into many practices. Chenrezig actually is pretty easy, relatively speaking. Some of them are really difficult, and without experienced good teachers, it's almost impossible to penetrate into the practice unless you've done it a lot, or unless you've done other similar practices a lot. So part of the protection of the practice and the tradition is to make some guidelines around who is authorized to engage in the practice. What to speak of, even just to hear the instructions. And so the empowerment is a piece in that puzzle where you would like to practice Chenrezig. It's actually highly recommended that everyone who practices Chenrezig first have a series of other rituals that they go through in order to do it, and one of them is an empowerment. So we don't always do that. In fact, we rarely do it here, though individuals often go elsewhere and get the empowerment. And we always recommend to do that. And it's largely around protecting the practice, not just the text, but the practice, protecting the person who wants to engage in the practice so that they come to it in a way which feels perhaps inspirational, connected with somebody who's done the practice for a long time, so they have a sense of confidence coming right into the practice. It's not like just all doubts and things and hoping that somehow they'll all resolve themselves, because they don't tend to do that. And so the empowerment is given through a ritual that is meant to provide a stage for carefully giving the practice, not just as if, but because it's a precious thing to get. So if you can be convinced that it's a precious thing to get, kind of like, I have this jewel here, and I just happen to know you well enough to know that there's some things that you would really like in your life that you don't have now, and I say, I can give you those things through this jewel, and you believe that, it's actually, I think all of us would say, if you believe that, and I was compelling enough in my presentation, it actually might work. You might actually get those things. So there's a way in which the empowerment is connected to that kind of, those conditions to bring about fruition of practice. The best thing that somebody can do, like even a renowned teacher, is to be a cause for other people practicing the Dharma. And the worst thing they can do is to become a hindrance for others to practice the Dharma. So the empowerment is a link, a bridge between those two possibilities too. So I'm sure that Bill and Dora and Zopar could add more to that.
I think for me, one of the important elements in empowerment is just that piece of you actually have to show up. You really have to show up. And the person who's offering the empowerment also has to really show up. And you show up in the context of that person really stepping into the practice. That's part of the empowerment is the preparation piece that the preceptor of the empowerment goes through in order to bring kind of their highest energy, or the kind of put their best foot forward, really collect their energy so that they're really into that. And then you step into that and you bring your own interest in the practice and your own openness into that. In that meeting, there are things that happen that are beyond just information sharing. There's something that's possible there, where the gift actually feels like it goes beyond a kind of solid boundaries. It's here. I have it. I'll put it down. You can have it, but it's still out here. It's a gift. It's a transference that goes beyond that kind of separation. That's not always felt, but that's part of the notion that there isn't actually, in the end, any kind of separation, any kind of fundamental difference. So showing up for that, I think, is important. And with the Chenrezig practice here, in some places people will have different opinions about whether it's absolutely essential to have an empowerment before you start before you start doing a practice. Some people might even say that what we did this morning, that's, you know, shouldn't even do that without an empowerment, without going through that. But it feels, we've got to come down on the side, it feels inappropriate to ask people to commit to something without sort of seeing something about it, without having some little sense of it. And so perhaps better to, the phrase that's come to my mind is, on the flippant side, is try before you buy. To see what this is, and then if you are really interested in it, if you really want to cultivate this as an ongoing practice, I think it's actually essential to have that kind of meeting, to really show up and say, yeah, I really want to do this, and to show up with somebody who has really done it, really invested enough time in the practice and in depth that it's really transformed them in a deep way. And we're fortunate that we have Mama Sansi not so far off.
He was doing it, isn't he doing a Chenrezig?
Yeah,
empowerment?
it actually.
Is it this weekend?
No, it's actually it's on the 18th. It's the same day that the retreat
The
starts.
retreat starts.
So I'm thinking anybody who is going to come to the retreat who wants to go to the empowerment, there's special dispensation for showing up a little bit late.
And also,
Would be a good
if you can't come to the retreat, but you could go get the empowerment, you can start practicing here,
Yeah.
obviously. So they don't have to go together. I wanted to say just my experience about first being introduced to Vajrayana, just to give a flavor of the wide variety of experiences we can have, was just following a teacher, really seeing something in that teacher that was different than all the other humans I had run into up to that time, and just being like, pulled in. So she was doing that, so I just started doing it. And no empowerment, not much explanation, just go to a retreat called that, wonder why you're there, and you're going on in Tibetan and Sanskrit, and just wondering what you're doing there. But it just, something like soaking yourself in it, it just starts. And then later, quite a bit later, got the empowerment. And I had almost a feeling like earning my way toward the empowerment by just doing something that didn't make any sense to me. But the sense that did make, it wasn't nonsense. The sense it made was this person who's showing all these qualities that I want in my life said, go this way, do this. How did you get those qualities? Do this. Okay. And after a few years, it's almost 10 years before I got the actual empowerment. And then it is true, something shifted, like boost, get a boost. And the other thing is the empowerment to me is much like an introduction to, again, someone you want to make a deep, honorable, long-term relationship with. So you want the front end to come out good, So someone brings you in there and introduces you, like, hello. And then you have a good footing. Yeah, so just about that one. We all have our own separate karma with these practices, because in beginningless lives I would say, I'm not Buddha, so I don't know, but conjecture, you wouldn't be here if you didn't have some sort of karmic connection to coming here, right? Causes and conditions. So something's gone on. So that's cool. That's a good, happy thing.
Is that what you were looking for?
We went all over.
Yes, I was actually just wanting it to be raised as a general topic because I think that the other questions about feeling connected to the practice and how one gets connected to the practice, it seemed like it was a topic that a number of people might like to hear.
I have a question. You said like practice this 100 times a day. What part are you talking? You just doing that whole visualization?
I just meant I was really just talking about the flashing the visualization so that you develop a familiarity with it by just dint of repetition.
And so flashing it is from Chenrezig
Either one.
to the whole thing. Just
At the moment that I said that, I was thinking more of just from your own imagining the Chenrezig on the crown of the head with the lotus and moon seed and all. But just generally, I read an interesting thing from a teacher that from a teacher that I highly respect. I recently read I read quite a bit, but there was this one piece that really stuck in my mind, which was that in order to accomplish the Dharma, it is never done in long sessions. It's always done in very short sessions in large quantities.
Yeah.
That's a relief in a way.
Yeah, so he elaborated a little bit on it, but not too much. And he used the example of shamatha, where we often say the best shamatha is one breath. Just take one breath and let it go, and then do another one. Do another session, which is one breath long. But this teacher was talking about the Vajrayana primarily, that very short sessions. So I imagined that it was kind of like, in the old days, when you went to see a movie, you were really watching a fast-moving series of still frames. and this reminded me of that a little bit, that really you're like re-entering that realm of the deity in rapid succession. So he didn't say what rapid meant, but it was nonetheless, it was interesting to read. He said it's like it's never been done any other way. It's the only way that it can really be done. And when I thought about it and worked with it a little bit, I thought, well, it really makes sense to me. Because I can visualize almost anything in a flash. Almost anything. But if I have to hold it for 5 seconds, now we're in a totally different game. But if all I got to see is just the image and then let go of it, I can do that over and over.
So it's sort of like an instant visualization and an instant dissolution.
Yeah, except the dissolution is not, so I don't really, I haven't gone this far into it, though it's something that I'm interested in, I'm looking at, but he didn't, as far as I'd gone, he didn't go into the dissolution as an intentional step. It was maybe more like you don't do anything to hold it there, and so it just naturally dissolves. And then as it's dissolving, you put it there again, and then it just naturally dissolves. And little by little, it becomes more stable. It didn't take very long for me to get a sense. Historically, I'm a terrible visualizer. So I'm immediately drawn to anyone who's a renowned teacher saying, this is how you do it, that isn't how I've been failing to do it. So it didn't take me very long to discover, whoa, this is actually really quite Good.
That didn't answer your
No,
question.
I did want to know that part, and then in addition to that, if you're practicing like a 30 minutes sit, a shamatha kind of thing, and then is it, so you've done your refuge at the beginning, and
Yeah.
can you just, is it okay to just try and incorporate that visualization and do the,
You said shamatha, so what's the visualization?
well, in the middle, you do shamatha, and then you're quiet and peaceful, and then try and do the Chenrezig visualization.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see.
And then you do your dedication of the, just
Yeah.
in sort of a normal shamatha sit, could you, or do this flashing, 10 times, or, to just get kind of familiar and feel more comfortable.
Well, what I'm hearing you ask, so I just need to confirm, is this what you're asking? That you're engaged in shamatha, which you're comfortable and familiar with,
Right.
and maybe because it's a good session of shamatha, and so the mind is still, and from there you launch into Chenrezig. Are you saying, is that okay to do? Well, it's more than okay. I would think that you would do that every time that you sit down.
Without doing all those Tibetan.
Oops.
Well, but when you say it's okay to launch into it, but we've just done this whole thing that seems really foreign to me. The reason I'm asking this is I went through a big trauma, and my mind was very stirred up, and out of the blue, because I don't really practice Chenrezig, I've been exposed to it here and stuff.
Right.
I just started doing that whole visualization of Chenrezig, and it was just this. So I have some sort of connection to it, but this seemed.
Yeah.
And I'd like to sit in some practice that I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
And play with it. So,
Yeah.
So can I guess I'm asking permission. Can you do it without all? If I do a dedication at the end and do my normal refuge at the beginning and just take some time and not do the Tibetan chanting kind of thing. Maybe I can do it.
Yeah, I think there's nothing inherently wrong with that. So let's just look at what might be wrong with it, even though it's not inherently wrong with it. It's totally okay. I don't believe that anyone has attained enlightenment without screwing around with the meditation system. It's like, I just don't believe it. Like, how could you attain freedom by locking yourself up? It doesn't make sense. On the other hand, a piece of the key to the freedom is confidence. And one of the things that we get, we might say unfortunately, but I think on second look we'd say fortunately, is we lose a trust, a confidence in our path if we come to see that we are the ones who designed it. Because we already did that. And this is where we are. So, if I meet the Dalai Lama and the Dalai Lama says, your Chenrezig is really good, except you need to do this, I don't give it a second thought. I think, cool, I'm going to try that. Because I already know that I don't have that insight. So therefore, I have appreciation for this person, therefore I'm going to do that. And the confidence itself is really important. But the confidence is also dangerous. It's like driving a race car. You need confidence in its integrity, that it's actually going to work, it's not going to break in the middle of something. We need confidence in our practice. It's a big deal. And I'm the first one to say that is really difficult sometimes. I don't think I've ever found anything in my whole entire life more difficult to get confidence in than in my practice of the Dharma. I just had every reason. I'm good at reasons, and they don't help all the time. So I think that there's things that are okay to do, and there's other things that are not okay. And if you had the best case scenario, we might say, first, though I'll say in advance, I understand this isn't likely to happen. Nonetheless, the ideal might be, first, you really learn the script. Treat this like a drama, like it's a play. And so you want to change the play into something like an ab lib, interchange with somebody. First you learn the kind of the rules of the engagement, and then you go through, you get good at that, and little by little you actually discover like what you're doing there. And you discover that partly by making minor alterations and experimenting with what it is you're doing. But if you start that too soon, or become too elaborate and too flamboyant too soon, it'll backfire. You'll lose your confidence, and then you got to start over with it. Maybe another practice or something. This is why the Tibetans like to say, now you've taken this empowerment, you have a commitment with it. So that worked for the Tibetans, because they always knew when they went to an empowerment there's going to be a commitment, and they're going to really try to meet that commitment, and they don't beat themselves up when they don't make it. We don't like to get commitments retroactively, we don't like it. It doesn't work. But we need some way to protect ourselves from our own inclination to try to dismantle and understand something before we're actually quite ready to do it. And I think maybe that comes down to a personal issue rather than a general thing.
Well, yeah, I guess what I was thinking for me, and hearing you talk about how it's so foreign and it's like there's just too much stuff going on when you do that whole thing. If I sort of really got the visualization and felt comfortable with that, I might be more interested in doing the whole thing. Sort of break, when you talk about breaking it into chunks, but so that's why I was asking it more than ditching the whole.
I think it's one of those things where it's helpful to work with somebody and to go through that stuff personally. I can say from my own side that things that I would say to one person, I wouldn't say to another person. And that's just, you might say that's the best case scenario. I mean, the ideal situation is everybody has a qualified teacher that they relate to, and they get their instructions from that person, and they try out the experiments, and they get advice on it, and it's a working relationship. That's the best case scenario. The downside of it is it's resource intensive, and so it doesn't happen very often. But I think it's the best. And from that best, then the ways in which we kind of, in some sense, we try to mass produce the result, what we end up with is a fairly large percentage of people who don't get it, who might have gotten it under different circumstances. So it's still, maybe in this world that's the best, but that's my sense. I mean, I know even with Kala Rinpoche, I would go to him and totally irritated with the practice. Like I had no use for it, is the truth. I just wanted out. And by wanting out, it means that I felt a commitment to the connection. And so I couldn't get out without him giving me permission. And he would work with me on practices in a way that I know he didn't work with everybody exactly like that. Maybe he worked entirely different with certain other people. If he had told me, no, you just must do it this way, there isn't any other thing to do, I would have totally given up. No, I don't see, there's no foothold there. You're asking me to climb a vertical wall, and it's totally smooth. In fact, it's a melting glacier. And I can't do it, I'm not even going to try. Done. That's definitely what would have happened. So we each need something different for this. And the first thing we need to find out about, I think, from my perspective is we need to get a sense of why we would do this. So I like to say it's all about recognizing the nature of mind. Once we realize that we have not recognized it, which for many people is a big deal, they think it's just obvious. I look in the mirror, I see my face. What more do you need? Once we realize that we don't recognize it and that we have a growing interest in recognizing it, then all sorts of things open up. It's surprising, maybe not, shouldn't be surprising, but to me it is, how many people actually think, this is a no-brainer, I know my mind. So,
What you described in a certain way, when I pointed out my problem, the root text is like only like just a few pages. What you described is actually not so far off
Right, that's
from,
what I was
from
thinking.
the root text. What you also described also shows that, but it didn't happen all by itself. You actually had to do something before you developed enough of a connection where that actually could come up in that situation. So that's the part where that is like going through the Spanish dialogue. You know, albóndigas no te dije. Remember, you go through all these things and you say that over and over again. But then sometime you can actually have a conversation. And so what you had a conversation there. And but that doesn't happen without having put some other pieces together. So figuring out the skillful way into it, so you do develop a sense of, I see. The point of going through these funny sounds in this odd language is so that I will be able to have this conversation. I will be able to actually express something. I'll be able to hear something. That's one of the reasons that that's where I start with the Chenrezig practices, just with the root piece. Then you can start to see from that point of view, why would you add something? It's to make this element kind of more transparent. It's not to cram, to put a whole bunch more stuff. It's like there is this element here. Let's make it more transparent. Let's open this up. Let's look into this. So then it's like, okay. Then there's a reason to want to do the other pieces. And again, you don't have to do them all the time. But sometimes it's kind of like, in order to have that conversation, sometimes you have to practice your dialogue.
There's the point too that of course the words that are in the text are meant to be a support for something that happens in your mind. So the praise or the homage page, it's not about saying those words without meaning, it's about the meaning. So if you can, another way, we talked about doing practices in Tibetan, doing English, there's also doing them internally, and which could be with a text in front of you. So you say, the visualization section, do the visualization. Remember it in your mind. You can do it longer by recalling a lot of details, or you can do it shorter by just recalling it as best you can, the whole thing. And then you're at the homage, and you can just feel and think homage. You don't, if you use those, you can use those words, or you can do it, or you can do both. The words are meant to cause or support that thing that's happening on a more sort of psycho-emotional, whatever, mental level. So, but as Bill says, you probably don't have a sense of homage unless you've sort of read the thing and know that there's an homage section.
It almost sounded, the way you described it, that the visualization and the homage piece actually sort of happened just together. Just by it coming up, you had a relationship with it that was very vivid. You didn't have to say, now I should have a vivid relationship with this. They were naturally together.
Well, what was helpful, because it's hard to just relate to all that,
Yeah.
Were you talking about making it into blocks or pieces? So I was just wondering, the question is just how far can you break it down before you start putting all the, the pieces together and that was really helpful. It just got me thinking about, how I could do that,
Yeah.
So thank you.
And you'd actually done it.
Renovate. Thank you.
Now, sometimes we actually have to bring something up, have it pointed out, but no, actually, you just did it the right way.
What?
What? I thought I was doing something else. No, you just actually just did it.
So I have a question regarding taking impairments for multiple teachers. In the same lineage, of course, but maybe you take an impairment from Lam Son Sing, and then you go to India and you take an impairment from Kempo or from one of the Rinpoches.
Same empowerment.
What, a different one. My understanding is you have Samaya with that teacher that you take the impairment from. So when you're taking an impairment from multiple teachers, how do you hold that Samaya when you have, how does that work?
What's Samaya?
Well, maybe you could talk about Samaya. What is Samaya?
I asked you first. Why do you see a problem? I'm not saying there isn't one.
Because,
Just
I mean,
curious.
I think I've clarified it with you before. So if you have a group teacher, you can hold each of the teachers that give you an impairment as a representation of your root teacher, and so there's no issue there. But it seems to me that you do have a certain relationship with the teacher that you took an impairment from.
Yeah.
That is special. So I'd just like to kind of tease that out.
Yeah. This is an area of great diversity of opinion. So, I remember Trungpa Rinpoche once saying that in this age, any empowerment that you can get from somebody, you should get it. He didn't even make a distinction at that particular.
Push that microphone up closer.
He didn't even make a distinction at the time of saying this that might have included something like, be careful about who you take the empowerment from. It was so blanket, it was shocking. Now, he may have actually felt like everybody already understood something about it. Who knows? I don't know. But it contrasts with the person we used to consider to be the wild man, Trungpa Rinpoche. And he was arch-conservative about this. He, in order to get a fundamental, basic empowerment from him in one of the tantric practices, you had to at least complete Ngondro, which for most people was a multi-year commitment. That multi-year, if you did it consistently, you might finish it in a few years. And without that, he once said, when somebody said, why do you do this? and they even used Colin Rinpoche as an example. He would give an empowerment to anybody. He never, I don't know that I ever even heard of him suggesting that somebody shouldn't take a certain empowerment. It appeared to be just completely open. So two extremes, two like diametrically opposed apparently. So therefore I say it's like the diversity of opinion is big. One of the things about empowerments that is disturbing is that they tend to raise a lot of money. So when somebody gives an empowerment, they tend to get a lot of money. So there's nothing wrong with getting a lot of money, but it's bothersome to some people, including myself, when it seems apparent that somebody's doing it for that reason. So now you definitely have an internal conflict, and it's even worse if you don't have an internal conflict. So it's who to get an empowerment from is a difficult question to answer. If you have a close connection with somebody who has been your teacher for a long time and they give an empowerment, then you have a kind of a simple path to it. And the issue of Samaya, which is fundamentally holding the view consistently that your teacher is fully awakened. That's one definition of the Samaya. You never give that up. And so you relate to that understanding through your relationship with the teacher. Well, if the teacher is good, that's very powerful. If they're not good, it's very powerful in a way that maybe you wouldn't want to be trapped in. So it's really this is the essence of the Vajrayana. It's a dangerous path when it's not populated by the right people. And on the other hand, it's powerful. So everybody wants the powerful without the danger. But nobody sells an insurance policy, so it's entirely up to you to figure it out. Now, there's an escape hatch in that whole thing too, which is actually rather interesting, and that is that you can have a charlatan for a teacher, but if the student is more or less pure, it could work out to everyone's advantage, because they will actually take even being used as a blessing. In which case, it probably is a blessing. But you can see, it's tricky. If you take an empowerment, let's say, from Lama Sansen, and let's say the empowerment is Chenrezig, or something more esoteric than Chenrezig even. And because he gives numerous empowerments, he gives true empowerment, for example. And later on, you hold a positive attitude towards Lama Satsang, and you hold the view that actually you received that empowerment from an awakened teacher, which is partly what we do with Chenrezig empowerments, of course. We often think that the person who's giving the empowerment is Chenrezig. That is to say, they're so thoroughly versed and experienced in the practice that we say they've met the deity face to face. That's the ideal situation. So whatever else you think about the person, if you're confident that that's taken place, then you can have some certainty in your holding the view of the teacher being awakened. It's never not dangerous. It's always got a little bit of a difficult thread with it. Now, I think that thread disappears if you start working with people who are renowned for their integrity and their realization. You know, you go and get an empowerment from the Dalai Lama, then you feel like, I can't go wrong here. But the interesting thing is the Dalai Lama knows that things can go wrong even then. And so what you're likely to end up with, you went to get an empowerment with Chenrezig, like many of us did when His Holiness visited Seattle many years ago. And what we got was half the empowerment, because he basically said, I don't know you. I don't know who all of you people are, or what you'll do with this, or whether you'll end up harming yourselves and others or what. So I've only gone this far. Now, if you want the rest, you need to go to your teacher and ask for the rest of it. So that's very reassuring in the sense that you feel like there's so much integrity in that person that even the most straightforward, commonly given empowerment, even by people who we might think probably shouldn't be giving empowerments, the Dalai Lama stops short because he doesn't know all 2,000 people who are there. Now, most teachers would say, you know what, we can't afford to not give this empowerment. It's just, it's a difference in who those beings are. Empowerments are scary in many ways. I remember Kala Rinpoche at one point, when empowerment started, it was just about to start, and he said that if you cannot look around the room, and if you cannot in your own mind hold the view that there is no one in this room who is not on the Bodhisattva path, like having attained some realization, if you cannot look around the room and hold that view of each person, then you shouldn't be in this room. And if you hold some grudge to somebody in the room and you feel like you cannot give that up, then you shouldn't be in the room. And I remember thinking like, that, you know, we're all sitting here, and some people are going to have a hard time getting up and leaving, even if they think they should. But that really stuck in my mind. I thought, you know, that's a level of integrity that most of us will not be able to manifest. Even when we think to ourselves, well, I wish I'd heard that before, I wouldn't have even shown up today. Here I am sitting here, it's like I can't really, now I can't do it. That sort of thing can create problems then in how we relate to our path. So I think it's the whole business of empowerments is tricky in terms of really understanding what they're about and taking them with the right attitude and holding the right view about them. This whole thing about samaya with the teacher is also very important. There's no rule that says your samaya is not important if the teacher turns out to be a fraud. If they turn out to be abusive, whatever it is, there's no like back door to it to get away from it. This is the commitment you make, and it's the commitment to enlightenment on behalf of all sentient beings, and our personal comfort with it is not a piece of the formula. And if it was a piece of the formula, I'm not sure how well it would work. I don't like that person anymore, so now I'm not going to continue to work with them. Well, that's just what we do in our ordinary lives all the time. So it's meant to like lock us into something. And it just so happens that sometimes you get locked into something that maybe wasn't that helpful. Or you need some help getting out.
You can need some help figuring out how
to navigate that.
How to navigate it, because the easy thing, it's easy to think nice things when you think somebody's nice, and it's
equally easy to think bad things.
And it's, then the other option is when I'm thinking they're not nice, then I think bad things. But that's actually not, they're not the two options.
No.
And that's the tricky thing. And to step outside of that kind of thinking into something that navigates it in a way that does not paper over what's going on, does not try to call something good when it's not, and relate to it in a way, but relate in a way that you're not trapped into being stuck in the old patterns of thinking about it. But if we're fortunate, our teachers will not give us such big challenges that we just can't navigate. But sometimes it's there, and then we have to figure out how to navigate. But
Yeah.
it's not a matter of papering it over.
Yeah, and the Tibetans were aware of this too, right? I mean, they're as aware of it as we are. There's a saying that if a student breaks their samaya with their teacher, the student ends up spending some time in hell, but the teacher spends even more time. So there's a link here between these things that is quite complex, and I think it's helpful. I wish that we had more time to talk about these things before getting empowerments, and we somehow we don't have it, or we don't make the time. And I know that the most teachers who I respect also don't make the time for it. And yeah, they're not putting it aside. They're still saying this is what it is. So it is hard for Westerners often. I remember having a big argument with one of Kala Rinpoche's translators when he was going around and telling people after an empowerment what their commitment was, and I remember saying, I don't have that commitment. And he says, yeah, you do, you took that. And I said, no, I said, actually, I'll tell you when I have a commitment.
You got your Irish up.
It was an intense encounter. And later I laughed about it, and I still laugh about it. But I truly didn't. I just totally put the whole thing aside. I decided, actually, with Kala Rinpoche, that the empowerment was void.
Yeah.
That actually, if I wanted to take it, there'd be more opportunities. I needed to think about it more before taking it. And then I got into trouble by not showing up for empowerments. But never with Kala Rinpoche, only with the handlers and the translators and so on. You're not showing up for an empowerment with Kala Rinpoche? What, you have no commitment or nothing? It's like, now I look back at it and I think it's like it was a confusion fest. Completely.
I mean, things are better these days.
Things are way better these days, yeah.
Everybody's more educated.
Not sure about everybody, but in general.
It was very easy to want to reduce things to kind of a simple legalistic formula.
Yeah.
And that it is like, this is like, we were all kind of would-be legal assistants who think we really kind of know the origin of law and the meaning of it all, but all we know is kind of the first 10 rules that we read in something.
I do think that Western students are much more skillful and adept at how these pieces fit together these days. I mean, back when we were really newbies, we had no idea what it was. We didn't know how to spell the word empowerment, let alone navigate any of it. Or the word Samayo had that took a long time to get that clear. Like, what the hell is this thing? It's so important, and we can't even get it. We can't even get it figured out. Like, what is it? And yet, it's so important that it's like a determining factor in multiple lifetimes and all. Yeah. So anyway.
Can you
There
define
you are.
those terms?
Which terms?
Samaya and empowerment? Is that too? I know you have a beginner's evening each month, and maybe it's appropriate for that, but I'm intrigued.
They would say, why don't you ask a little Michael?
Right. Well, I think we just went over empowerment. Empowerment really is an introduction. Bill used that term. I have a friend. His name is Chen Rezi. And I think that you would really like to meet this person. And so you say, okay. And so we have a formal meeting. I get the person to come. Chen Rezi comes. You're there. I'm there. And I say, this is Chen Rezi. This is, now you got to remember what your name is.
Jane.
Jane. This is Jane. And everybody's happy.
And traditionally, there's a monetary exchange when this takes place.
Oh, there's always, yeah. I mean, this is in a certain way the loose currency of the whole thing. You know, you don't get an invoice for an empowerment, and these things are all considered up to the person receiving the empowerment. It's important to give something as to say, I appreciate what I just got. It's helpful to learn about what you're going to get before you get it, and to know about that rather than just getting it afterwards. Like, now you should give a gift, and you think, oh, nobody told me that. How much should I give? Well, I don't know, just whatever you want, and then you just feel confused by it. So it's helpful to do the homework up front. It'll always be helpful to do that. But it's basically an introduction. Like, this requires a formal introduction. It's kind of like meeting the Queen. You don't just go knock on the door. You won't get anywhere. You have to know somebody who knows the Queen. And not just anybody who knows the Queen, but somebody who knows the Queen. And then you get an introduction to the Queen. And maybe the somebody who knows the Queen also tells you why it is you might like to meet the Queen. So that you get a good start in the thing. It's really not a lot different than just our ordinary human interrelationship stuff.
And so, as you were saying, it's not always the same with each student, so there's not some sort of stock reason. In other words, that you would, as the person who does the empowerment, introduce it in a particular way to that student, because of what that student needs, or is it a traditional?
Somebody might
everyone
do that.
does it for the same reason.
They do it in the same reason, but they might do it differently.
Yeah. Okay.
That is, there's a formula for that, for the empowerment, that involves a number of symbolic implements. It's not considered essential that you know those symbolic implements, but I will say I found it very helpful to find out what those implements were for. At least most of them is because I think it's partly because we're all educated and we tend to be critical thinkers. If somebody says, don't worry about it, just go and do it, we tend to get suspicious about it, like there's something wrong with this. Does anybody know? How about the person who's giving the empowerment? Do they know anything? So I think it's better to have some of those things. And Trungpa used to say, I so admire him for this, he used to have people study for 6 months before an empowerment. 6 months. And he said, that's how it used to always be in Tibet. Like, if you were really going to get an empowerment and it was important, you had 6 months of study and work with it. And not only that, but empowerments generally in the West have been considered spectator events. That is, you show up, you make your offering, you watch the empowerer, the person who gives the empowerment, do their thing. They have some implements, play some music, you do some things, and it's done. But you feel like you were a spectator. And Trungpa used to always say, it's not a spectator event. You have a role to play in it. But it wasn't until I remember getting empowerments for 3-year retreat that I found out what the role was. And it's different for every empowerment. But there's a thing like somebody says, I'd like you to meet my friend Jane, then we have to do something, shake hands or share some personal history or do something. Something happens. That's our culture. And that's basically what was happening in the empowerment. There's things that you do while the empowerment's being given. Well, in order to do those things, you have to know what's happening with the empowerment. One person doesn't play football or any other game. It takes a certain sense of knowing what's going on. And then you participate, and even though it's a formula, you still feel a sense of participation. Just like shaking hands is a formula, but there's something happens when you touch the skin, you know. It's a lot like that. At its best, you know what's going on. But often we don't have time. It's not just Westerners, it's teachers too, the demands and all. They just don't have time to do it. And, you know, somebody like Eric could tell us in any moment, like, with this empowerment, you do this. But the likelihood that he'd have time is also not that great. So we end up going into it a little bit on the blind side. And And often, if our connection is strong enough, we can make do with the confidence in the situation that we just have.
It's what she had, what she was
Yeah,
describing.
yeah,
Yeah, you just keep doing
Yeah.
it because you have confidence in the teacher or the
this
words
person
or
introduced
the
me to 5
meaning.
people, and
Something.
it was great. And so they want me to meet somebody. I feel like, yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah.
So you didn't touch on Samaya.
Wonder why.
Ran out the clock.
Well, I did say what Samaya was. It's like it's holding the view that the teacher is actually awakened. That's very hard to do when they ask you to do things that feel to you maybe not easy to do. Not easy to do. Or they feel inappropriate. Or they feel illegal. Or they feel abusive. And so Samaya is something that I would say I don't recommend someone to even fake Samaya in the beginning of a relationship with a teacher. It's just too dangerous. And it's dangerous for a lot of things. You blow Samaya, the likelihood that you'll get it again later is diminishing. It's not good. So better to wait for some period of time as the relationship with a teacher or teachers grows, and you feel like you've kind of tested it and they've tested you, and there comes a time when you feel like I can hold this view. And then it's also helpful sometimes to go to the teacher. So I know with Bokar Rinpoche, numerous people went to him and said, I would like to do this, and he did not always say yes, but he sometimes did.
One of the things, it's easy to think of Samaya as a sort of yes or no piece. Bokar Rinpoche once was talking about this and said, well, you may have heard that to do this you need to see your teacher as the Buddha,
Yeah.
which feels like that's yes or no.
Yeah.
But he says, what I want you to do is I want you to look in your own mind and see how is it do you really see your teacher? Do you see your teacher as the Buddha? Do you see your teacher as a Bodhisattva? Do you see your teacher as somebody with some superior knowledge and understanding? Or merely as a colleague on the path who's helpful? So start there. Start there. Don't try to artificially sort of do the, quote, the right thing, because it's not authentic from where you are. So you start there, and then as you go into it, then be able to appreciate what it actually might mean. Then think about these kinds of situations. What would it actually mean? And when we can actually sort of see it from the inside, oh, that's how we'll hold a view in this kind of challenging situation. Then it's a different thing.
Right, so the problematic is more what you were saying, it's internal, rather than whether or not the teacher's actually what you're.
You look at the history of relationships with teachers, of great beings who studied with great teachers, and you commonly see things that probably if a teacher did those things today, they'd be in prison. You see terrible things sometimes. We love those things. We love to read about those things. Whether we'd love to actually have them occur is another question. But who wants to read a thing where everything is just like everyday life? We want to see a great teacher who was tried by fire and water and everything else and rose above it and succeeded and wrote fantastic practices and all of that. That's what we want. We love that.
As long as it's 3 centuries ago and
Yeah.
in an ocean away.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Michael, can you say something to those of us who may be going to receive the Chenrezig empowerment with Lama Tsongkhsen along the lines of what you were saying
Yeah.
to prepare us to receive it better?
Well, you could ask Lama Tsongkhsen.
Well, there won't really be time. We should show up.
Yeah, I know. And he doesn't like to talk about these things. And I think you can see why.
Isn't there a thing on the website on impairments?
Yeah. Mama Michael has a talk
Yeah.
on the
Oh, is there?
website.
So it's a
Oh.
good
Yes.
One thing about Lama Sansing is, so my characterization of him is that he is a very clean teacher. He's just a very clean guy. Like, no abuse, ever. No scandal around him, ever. I mean, he's a monk, and is for all anybody has ever seen, he has kept all of his vows. He's perfect from these perspectives. So somebody in that place, then you can feel confident that you get the empowerment. He doesn't fool around with changing the empowerment. You get the exact empowerment for Chenrezig. And you can see how an empowerment works from that perspective. He probably won't take even one question, but maybe one for the entire thing. And then he usually gives teachings on the practice the following day. And if you go and get an empowerment, it's good to do that. Whatever. If you're going to do Chenrezig, stay for the next day and go and get it. And you'll get something very different than what you got here. But you can also see no contradiction. He's giving it more kind of the traditional way, that if he had 20 Tibetans coming to get it, that's exactly what they would get. So you get all of that, you know, and you're likely to feel like it's not enough. I need more. But my experience is you're likely to feel that for the next 20 years. We all feel that all the time. Time. Break time.
Mark, what's your question?
Oh, no.
Mark,
Mark has a question.
Steve,
I think it's ice cream time if there's no
Well-
more questions.
I think
Well, no, there is ice cream, and it's not sitting out there melting, but it's also running over, so I just didn't know.
so. I think you, as Steve's teacher, should slap him so that we can watch.
That won't be very
that-
helpful.
No, he'll be happy.
Well, it's up to you whether you want to take Mark's question.
Well, this-
I'm going to meet with Mark later.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's take by this
Virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
So ice cream.
Ice